The glittering chandeliers of the Grand Arcadia Hotel in New York cast a warm, ethereal glow over the grand ballroom, illuminating the sea of tailored suits and elegant gowns. It was 7:15 p.m., and the air buzzed with anticipation. I, Gavin Blake, stood at the edge of the crowd, my simple black suit blending seamlessly into the shadows. No one paid much attention to me, the unassuming husband of Vivian Blake, the CEO of Everlux Biotech. Tonight was her night, the culmination of years of relentless ambition, the signing of a historic $100 million deal with TechCore, merging her biotech innovations with their cutting-edge tech infrastructure. Vivian emerged from the wings like a vision in her crimson mermaid gown, the fabric shimmering under the lights, her high bun accentuating her sharp features. Her Louboutin heels clicked confidently against the marble floor as she ascended to the stage. She was the epitome of power, a Forbes-listed executive with eyes like steel and a smile honed for boardrooms and cameras. I watched her with a quiet pride, the kind that didn't need applause. After all, I'd been there from the beginning, supporting her dreams from behind the scenes. The MC, a polished man in a tuxedo, stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Vivian Blake and her husband Gavin Blake to sign this groundbreaking partnership." The room erupted in applause. I straightened my tie and began my approach to the stage, my steps measured, my smile genuine. This was our moment or so, I thought. As I reached the third step of the dais, Vivian turned sharply, her expression shifting from triumphant to something colder, more calculated. The music faded, and the murmurs in the crowd died down. "Gavin," she said into the microphone, her voice slicing through the silence like chilled steel, "you don't need to come up here." The words hung in the air, and I paused, confusion flickering across my face. "They called for both of us," I replied softly, trying to keep my voice steady amid the growing whispers. She laughed, a sharp, practiced sound that echoed off the walls, devoid of warmth. "No, just me. This is my world now, Gavin. I'm at the peak of my career. I need someone who can soar with me, not someone who drags me back to the ground." The laughter spread through the room like a ripple, some guests chuckling awkwardly, others exchanging glances of pity. Flashbulbs popped from the press pit, capturing the moment in harsh bursts of light. I stood there frozen on the steps, feeling the weight of 100 eyes on me. My chest tightened not from anger, but from the raw finality of it all. This was Vivian, the woman I had loved, supported, and built a life with, dismissing me like an unwanted accessory. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a white envelope, striding down the steps to meet me. With a flick of her wrist, she pressed it against my chest. "Divorce papers! Sign them! I need a man who can fly beside me, not you." The envelope felt heavy in my hands, like it carried the ruins of our 7-year marriage. I looked into her eyes, searching for any trace of the woman who had once shared late-night dreams with me. There was none. Only ambition, cold and unyielding. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of shock and sympathy. I didn't argue. I didn't cause a scene. "If that's what you want," I said quietly, my voice barely audible over the din. I turned and walked away. The envelope clutched in my fist, the flashes of cameras blinding me as I exited the ballroom. The cool night air hit me like a slap as I stepped outside, hailing a cab amid the bustling Manhattan streets. In the back seat, I stared out at the blurred city lights, the envelope unopened on my lap. My mind raced, replaying her words, "Drags me back to the ground." If only she knew. Back at her penthouse, I headed straight to my study, the one room she had always dismissed as my hobby space. I flicked on the desk lamp, its green glow casting long shadows across the room. Sitting at the worn oak desk, I powered up my computer. The screen flickered to life, displaying files from 7 years ago, investment ledgers, anonymous funding agreements, and incorporation documents for Novagate Holdings, the shadow company I had founded in secrecy. Novagate had been my quiet empire built away from the spotlight. It was through this entity that I had funneled the initial capital into Everlux Biotech, back when Vivian's startup was just a fledgling idea scribbled on napkins. She had no idea that the angel investor who had saved her company from bankruptcy multiple times was me operating from this very desk. The $100 million deal she had just celebrated, it rested on infrastructure I had silently engineered through my subsidiaries. I opened the divorce envelope, at last scanning the cold legal jargon. Her handwritten note was tucked inside, scrawled in blue ink. I need someone who can fly high, not a burden. I set it aside, a faint smile crossing my lips, not of bitterness, but of resolve. She thought she had soared beyond me, but soon she would learn that every wing she spread had been crafted from my foundations. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of her awakening. 2 weeks had passed since that humiliating night at the Grand Arcadia, and the ink on the divorce papers was barely dry. I had signed them without protest, mailing them back through my lawyer with a simple note. As you wish. No drama, no pleas. Vivian had wanted her freedom, and I gave it to her. But freedom I knew came with unseen strings, ones I had woven long ago. Meanwhile, Vivian was basking in her victory. From what I could gather through discreet channels, she had moved on swiftly. Her office on the 49th floor of Everlux Tower had become her throne room. I pictured her there, swiveling in her ergonomic chair, a glass of vintage Cabernet in hand, her feet crossed on the desk in those designer heels. The tower itself was a monument to her success, a sleek glass monolith piercing the Manhattan skyline housing labs, where her biotech team fused genetics with AI. The $100 million deal with TechCore was the crown jewel promising to revolutionize personalized medicine through integrated tech platforms. She wasn't alone in her triumph. Damian Grant, her newly appointed CFO, had stepped into the spotlight beside her. I had met him once at a company event, a slick operator in his mid-30s with a Harvard MBA and a smile that screamed opportunist. Now he was more than just a colleague. Whispers from mutual acquaintances painted the picture, late-night strategy sessions that extended into dawn-shared suites at conferences and public appearances where their hands lingered too long. Finally free from that shadow, Damian had reportedly toasted at a private dinner, clinking glasses with Vivian as they laughed about my simplicity. I could almost hear her voice echoing those sentiments. Gavin never understood my vision. She might say her tone laced with that practiced condescension. He was content with the ground level, while I aimed for the stars. Damian would nod, his eyes gleaming with ambition, perhaps already calculating how to leverage her success for his own gain. They made a picture-perfect power couple, her the visionary CEO, him the financial wizard cutting costs and boosting margins. Under his guidance, Everlux's stock had surged post-deal, and Vivian was being hailed as a trailblazer in biotech. Magazine covers, TED invitations, investor galas. She was on top of the world. But I knew the cracks beneath that facade. From my own office on the 73rd floor of Hudson Edge Capital, a discreet, minimalist space far removed from the flashy towers, a different story unfolded. Novagate Holdings operated in the shadows, a network of subsidiaries that funneled investments without fanfare. Tracepath Logistics. One of my key arms handled the back end for companies like Everlux supply chains, data security, even raw material sourcing. It was invisible work, the kind that kept empires running without credit. I leaned back in my chair, tapping a pen on the stack of reports Lena, my assistant, had compiled. "Lena," I called through the intercom. "Bring me the internal audit on Everlux's last quarter, focus on material costs and supply chain." "Right away, Mr. Blake." She entered moments later, a folder in hand. Lena was sharp, loyal, and one of the few who knew the full extent of my holdings. "Here it is. Anything specific you're looking for?" "Just patterns," I replied, scanning the pages. The numbers told a tale of aggressive cost-cutting, raw materials, expenses up 38%, yet profits inflated by 52%. Digging deeper, I spotted anomaly shipments from unverified suppliers in Guangzhou, China. Biodegradable compounds for their gene-editing kits sourced at rock-bottom prices. It screamed corner-cutting, potentially compromising quality standards that TechCore demanded. Damien's fingerprints were all over it. As CFO, he had authorized the deals likely to pad short-term earnings and trigger bonuses. Vivian focused on the big picture, probably signed off without a second glance. But I knew the risks: FDA scrutiny, patent invalidations, even lawsuits if the materials failed safety protocols. One whistleblower tip and the house of cards would tumble. I set the report down my mind, already mapping the moves. This wasn't about petty revenge. It was about reclaiming what was mine. Everlux had started as Vivian's dream, but it was my anonymous infusions through Novagate that had kept it alive during the lean years millions poured in when banks turned her away. She had no idea that the mysterious benefactor she often credited in interviews was me sitting at this very desk. Picking up the divorce envelope from the drawer, I reread her note. I need someone who can fly high, not a burden. The words stung less now, replaced by a cold clarity. She had dismissed me as dead weight, but I was the foundation, and foundations, when pulled, bring everything crashing down. I dialed my lawyer first. Prepare the disclosure filings for Novagate's stake in Everlux. Keep it sealed for now. Next, a call to an old contact at TechCorp's compliance team. I have some data you might find interesting, anonymous, of course. As the pieces aligned, I felt no rush of vengeance, only the steady pulse of inevitability. Vivian was soaring, yes, but on wings I had built. And soon she would learn how fragile they were without me. The city lights twinkled outside my window, indifferent to the drama unfolding in its midst. I powered down the computer, grabbed my coat, and headed home to the quiet apartment I had rented post-separation. No penthouse glamour, just space to think. Tomorrow, the unraveling would begin. Vivian thought she had escaped a burden. Little did she know I was about to show her the true weight of her choices. 3 weeks after I set the wheels in motion, the first domino fell. I had sent an anonymous email to TechCore's compliance department from a burner account attaching the incriminating spreadsheets and shipment manifests from those dubious Guangzhou suppliers. No accusations, just facts, raw data that spoke for itself. The subject line was innocuous: potential supply chain irregularities in Everlux partnership. I knew their legal team would pounce. A $100 million deal couldn't afford even a whiff of scandal. The response was swift. By midday the next day, TechCore issued a formal notice all remaining payments under the contract were suspended pending a full audit of Everlux's material sourcing and quality controls. They cited concerns over compliance with FDA standards and ethical procurement. I watched the news break on my office monitor, a Bloomberg ticker flashing the alert. Everlux's stock dipped 8% in the first hour alone. Vivian must have felt the ground shift beneath her. I could imagine her in that glass-walled office on the 49th floor, her phone exploding with calls from panicked board members. She would have stormed into Damien's adjacent suite, her heels echoing like gunshots. "What the hell is this?" she'd demand, thrusting her tablet at him with the TechCore email on screen. Damien, ever the smooth operator, would try to downplay it at first, perhaps blaming a clerical error or an overzealous auditor. But under her glare, he'd crack. We needed to hit those margins." He'd stammer his Harvard Polish, peeling away. The Chinese suppliers were cheaper. It was just to bridge the quarter. Her fury would erupt then. "You jeopardized everything I've built," she'd shout, slamming her fist on his desk. In that moment of heat, Damien's true colors would show defensive self-preserving. He'd shift blame back to her. "You signed off on the reports, Vivian. You wanted the numbers to shine for the investors." The argument would escalate, revealing his opportunism. He'd never been in it for her vision, just the perks. As she stormed out, he'd be left sweating already, plotting his exit. The media frenzy hit like a storm. Within 48 hours, 3 major outlets, the Wall Street Journal, CNBC, and Forbes, ran headlines: Everlux Biotech under scrutiny supply chain. Scandal threatens 100 mem tech deal. They dissected the irregularities, quoting anonymous sources, one of whom was me through a proxy. Stock plummeted another 34% by week's end, wiping out billions in market cap. Investors fled like rats from a sinking ship, pulling funding and demanding refunds on recent rounds. Board members resigned in droves, citing irreconcilable ethical concerns. Everlux's once buzzing labs fell silent as key scientists jumped to competitors fearing the taint. Vivian scrambled to contain the damage. She called an emergency press conference in the tower's lobby, standing before a podium flanked by her PR team. Dressed in a crisp white suit, she tried to project confidence, but I could see the cracks. Through the live stream on my screen, the slight tremor in her hands, the forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This is a misunderstanding," she declared to the flashing cameras. "Everlux remains committed to the highest standards. We're cooperating fully with TechCore and will resolve this swiftly." But the reporters were relentless. "Ms. Blake, what about the allegations of falsified sourcing documents?" one asked. "And who exactly is behind Novagate Holdings? Your early investor sources say they're pulling support too." Her face paled at that last question. Novagate, my shadow empire, had indeed begun quietly divesting, triggering margin calls on her loans. She stammered a non-answer. "Novagate has been a silent partner. We're in discussions." But she had no idea who they truly were. The conference ended in chaos, her reputation fraying thread by thread. From my vantage on the 73rd floor, I monitored it all through dashboards and alerts. No glee, no satisfaction, just a methodical observation. Vivian's calls to Damien went unanswered. He had vanished, likely on a flight to some non-extradition haven, leaving her to face the fallout alone. She began suspecting sabotage, a rival firm, perhaps a disgruntled employee, but never me. In her mind, I was still the burden she discarded, not the architect of her empire. I escalated quietly. A tip to the SEC followed, bundled with forensic accounting reports highlighting the inflated profits and hidden liabilities. Their investigation launched officially the next day. Everlux Biotech faces federal probe over financial irregularities. Vivian's personal accounts were frozen pending review, her assets seized as potential evidence. She was no longer the untouchable CEO. She was a suspect in her own downfall. As the crisis deepened, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the city below. Vivian had built her world on illusions of independence, of superiority. But illusions shatter. And now, with the SEC closing in, she was learning that control was never hers to begin with. This was the moment she realized the strings were real, and I held them all. 2 months after the SEC's probe clamped down like an iron vice, Everlux Biotech was a ghost of its former self. The federal investigation had unearthed layers of financial discrepancies, falsified procurement records, inflated earnings reports, and ethical breaches that traced back to Damien's desperate shortcuts. He had vanished without a trace, likely fleeing to some offshore haven with whatever scraps he could salvage from his bonus accounts. Vivian, stripped of her CEO title by a panicked board, faced asset freezes and mounting legal fees. The company, hemorrhaging cash, announced an emergency auction of its core assets, intellectual property lab equipment, even the gleaming tower headquarters. I watched the proceedings unfold from afar, my involvement still veiled. Through Altros Capital, a fresh subsidiary, I had spun up under Novagate Holdings. I positioned myself as a bidder. The auction was held in a sterile conference hall in Midtown Manhattan, the kind of place where dreams went to die under fluorescent lights. Bidders from rival firms circled like vultures, but I outmaneuvered them all, securing the entire lot for nearly $60 million. It was a steal considering the foundational tech I had seeded years ago. The deal closed quietly, no fanfare, just wire transfers and signatures. A week later, Vivian received an invitation to Altus's headquarters for a knowledge transfer session standard protocol for acquisitions, or so the email claimed. I knew she would come. With her empire in ruins, she had little choice but to cooperate if she hoped for any severance or reference. The Altus office was understated a converted loft in Chelsea with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson. No ostentatious logos, just efficiency. I arrived early, settling into the head of the long oak conference table, a stack of documents before me. When she entered, escorted by my receptionist, the air thickened with unspoken history. Vivian looked diminished, her once impeccable suit rumpled her makeup, unable to hide the shadows under her eyes. She froze in the doorway, her gaze locking onto me. Gavin. The word escaped her lips like a gasp, her clutch slipping slightly in her hand. I leaned back, gesturing to the seat across from me. Hello, Vivian. Please sit. She approached hesitantly, her heels echoing in the empty room. What is this? Why are you here? This is Altus Capital, I replied, evenly sliding a folder toward her. The new owner of Everlux's assets, and yes, it's mine not directly, but through channels I've maintained for years. Her face drained of color, her fingers trembling as she opened the folder. Inside were the acquisition papers stamped and final. You bought Everlux. How you couldn't possibly. I could and I did. I met her eyes, my voice steady, devoid of triumph. Everlux didn't spring from nothing. Remember the anonymous seed funding that kept it afloat in the early days, the mysterious benefactor you toasted in interviews that was Novagate Holdings, my holdings. I built it from the shadows, funneling resources through subsidiaries like TracePath Logistics. The supply chains, the initial patents, even the tech integrations that landed your big deal, they all trace back to me. She slumped into the chair, the folder crumpling in her grip. This can't be real. You were just supportive. You never said, I never needed to. I interrupted, my tone firm but calm. I loved you enough to let you shine, to stand on that stage while I worked from this very network. But you called me a burden, Vivian. You handed me divorce papers in front of the world because I wasn't flying high enough. Well, now you see I wasn't dragging you down. I was the one who gave you wings from the ground up. Tears welled in her eyes, her composure cracking. Gavin, please. I was wrong. I got caught up in the success, the pressure. Damien, he manipulated the numbers, but I should have known. Don't do this. We can rebuild. Give me a chance to make it right. I stood walking to the window, gazing at the river below. The plea hung in the air, but it stirred nothing in me now. Rebuild. You dismantled us first. You chose ambition over loyalty, Damien over me. This isn't revenge, it's reclamation. Everlux was always mine and foundation. I'm just taking back what's owed. She rose, stepping closer, her voice breaking. Why didn't you tell me from the start? We could have shared this. I loved you. You loved the spotlight, I said, turning to face her. And when it blinded you, you saw me as an obstacle. It's too late for regrets, Vivian. The assets are transferred. The company's future is in my hands now without you. She backed away, tears streaming down her face, clutching the folder like a lifeline. What am I supposed to do now? Start over, I replied simply, like I did after you left me on those steps. She left the room without another word, the door clicking shut behind her. I returned to the table alone, but unburdened, knowing this chapter was closed. 1 month after our confrontation in the Altus conference room, the dust had settled, or rather buried Vivian under its weight. She had retreated to a cramped rental in Brooklyn, a far cry from the penthouse views she once commanded. The media had moved on her name, reduced to a footnote and cautionary tales about corporate hubris. No more Forbes features, no investor galas, just the echo of unpaid bills and the sting of obscurity. I sent her one final package, anonymous as always. Inside was our wedding photo, the one from our simple ceremony 7 years ago, her eyes bright with promise, mine full of unwavering faith. Tucked beside it, a handwritten note. I built the lights for you, but you used them to burn me. No signature needed. She would know. It wasn't cruelty, it was closure, a reminder that actions echoed louder than apologies. As for me, I carried on in the quiet rhythm I had always preferred. Novagate Holdings thrived in the background, its subsidiaries nurturing the next wave of innovations. I opened a nonprofit center in Soho dedicated to supporting female-led startups, providing mentorship, seed funding, and the kind of ethical guidance that Vivian had forsaken. It was my way of honoring what could have been talent paired with integrity, ambition, grounded in loyalty. Young entrepreneurs flocked there, pitching ideas at communal tables, unaware that the man listening had once poured his soul into one such dream only to watch it turn against him. I didn't remarry. There were invitations, dinners with intriguing women from boardrooms and galas, but I declined them all. Solitude suited me now, a peaceful armor forged from betrayal. Evenings found me walking along the Hudson, the city lights reflecting off the water like scattered stars. No resentment lingered. Vivian's fall had taught me the value of self-preservation. I had loved her enough to build her world, but I loved myself enough to reclaim mine. In her dim Brooklyn apartment, Vivian must have stared at that photo, the note's words searing like truth serum. She had soared, yes, but on borrowed wings. Dismissing me as a burden, she had severed her own lifeline. Now facing the ruins, she understood success without foundation was illusion. I didn't hate her. I simply no longer cared. Justice wasn't about vengeance. It was the quiet certainty that I needed no forgiveness to move forward. Life continued, and so did I, unburdened at last.